O'clock, so we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. First item of business is closed meeting. Be it resolved, the Montgomery County Board of Supervisors of Montgomery County, Virginia hereby enters into closed meeting for the purpose of discussing the following. Section 2.2-3711, discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific officers, appointees, or employees of any public body. 1, Library Board. 2, Local Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Board. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Ms. Blevins?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. DeMotts?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Jeffrey Zakowski?
Aye.
7 ayes.
We are in closed session. there a motion to come out of closed meeting?
So moved. Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, Madam Secretary, call the roll.
Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Demotts?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Ms. Blevins?
Aye.
Chair Chakowski?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Next is certification of the closed meeting. Whereas the Board of Supervisors of Montgomery County has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by the Board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Supervisors of Montgomery County, Virginia hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, 1, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certification resolution applies, and 2, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion conveying the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the Board. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Madam Secretary?
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Demotts?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Ms. Blevins?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Chair Chakowski?
Aye.
7 ayes.
And now if the county administrator would lead us, since he's here today, and
Absolutely, glad to
your
be here.
your substitute did a great job last meeting.
Thank you, I'm good to hear. Let's rise for a moment of silence, and then I'll lead us in the pledge. Let us pledge, please.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much.
Okay, under presentations, we're going to start with Davenport and Company.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Glad to have Courtney Rogers with us this evening from Davenport. Our two presentations tonight, our first one is going to be talking about borrowing money, and the second one is going to be talking about spending federal money. So it's all about the money tonight. Courtney, glad you're here.
Thank you.
All right, good evening. I'm going to apologize, first of all, because I started sneezing at 10 o'clock this morning, and I've been sneezing all day. So if I've got a little bit of sinus going on, I guess all the pollen is back out again, especially since we haven't had any rain. It's been dry.
Yep.
Of course, I was out all day yesterday, so I'm sure that's what it was. Great to be in front of you guys again. Great to be in front of you without a mask on. This will be the first meeting in a long time that I didn't have to walk in, at least the room, with a mask. But I did bring it. So as Craig said, we're going to talk a little bit about where we are in terms of our capacity. We want to talk about financial planning. That's something we always are working on. And so what we were asked to do is to go and look at our debt capacity, see where we stand, look at our debt ratios, make sure that we're staying within those, and see what capacity we might have for additional debt down the road. Want to first start out by just talking about interest rates. The last time we sold bonds in 2019, you can see on the graph here, rates were down at that time at historic lows, and what have we done? But we've gone further down and have hit even lower lows since then. Rates are still very good. We're actually still lower than where we were in 2019. You might ask, well, why are we still, in a few slides, we're going to show you that we're still using 4% and 5% for our planning rates. And that's because part of the capacity is not just in the next couple of years, but also 10 years down the road. And we don't know where rates are going to go. At some point, we keep saying they're going to go up. We think they're going to go up. When we look at our existing tax-supported debt, first looking at the general government side only, we wanted to start by showing you the drop down from fiscal 21 to fiscal 22. You can see we've circled there that it's roughly about a $900,000 drop in your general government debt service only from about 4.1 million down to 3.1 million. When we look at the schools only from 21 to 22, because of that issue we actually have a bump up in debt service. So for fiscal 22, the county did a one-time reallocation of that drop down from the general government side over to the schools so that you didn't have to come in your budgetary process and find additional dollars to pay for the debt service on the school side. But that goes back and resets, and that's important to note because when we start looking at affordability versus capacity, affordability being the cash flow side, it's important to note that we're going to go back to that 19.6 million, that figure that's at the top of the total column for 2021. We're going to use that figure as the number of dollars that is available on the budgetary side for schools for additional debt service on the school side. When you look at it together, the total debt service, you'll see they actually dropped down slightly, but that money was kept in the budget and basically used for capital projects. So when we look at the overall debt as a percentage of assessed value, you're in very good shape. Our policy is not to exceed 4%, 3% kind of being our goal. We're well below that. The issue is really debt service as a percentage of expenditures. Think of it as annual debt service divided by your budget. If you want to put it in your personal finances, it's basically how much debt, how much is your mortgage as a percentage of your annual or annual income, if you would, your total salary for the year. So how much are we actually using to pay debt? Our goal is to not get above 12%, and you might recall that back in 2013 when we had the Blacksburg High School situation, we were in the middle of doing the Auburn High School and middle school projects already. And we basically, the agency said, okay, we understand it's a one-time situation, it's an emergency. We told them it's going to be several years. You can see it took about 5 years finally to get back under that line. And then we've been under that now for a couple of years. When our projection was to get back up there with that 2019 issue, which we have in 21 and 22, but then it comes back down in 23 as some of the older debt starts falling off. So when we look at our debt capacity under that 12% number, it's debt service to expenditures. That's going to be our limiting factor at 12%. We use 5%, and again, we're just using level debt service. So we're basically taking 20 years level debt service at 5%. How much could we issue and get in that, basically going back to that previous slide, that between essentially the brown and the blue lines, between that 10 and 12%, or about 2%. And so when we look at that number, it's 47 million in 2023. That basically takes us back up to that line. But then we pay a little bit of debt service down, and so we have a little bit more capacity in 24. And again, because it's a combination of the drop down as well as our assumption has been a 2% annual growth in your budget. That may or may not be the case every year. Obviously, last year your budget probably didn't grow because of the pandemic. So there's years that obviously aren't going to grow that much, but that's kind of been the average, and that's the number we've used. So again, over a 5-year period, it's about 135 million. If interest rates were to stay low, we use 4% as an example, you can pick up a little bit more. So we go from 47 to 51 in that first year. For the 5-year period, we go from like 135 up to 147. So that 1% change of lower debt service does give us some more capacity. So what we were asked to do is to go and look and see how much could we issue at this point. Now, keep in mind, we were just talking about 4 and 5%, but right now we're closer to 2% in terms of borrowing rate. Knowing that we probably aren't going to borrow for several months, and knowing that there's a lot of pressure for rates to go up because we're coming out of the pandemic, there's just a feel for inflation out there, we added 50 basis points to the current market to run our numbers. So we're going to naturally pick up a little bit of gap between that 4% and basically 2+% interest rate that we're going to, when we run our numbers. We started with 75 million because if you might recall the last time we were speaking about capacity, the number was around 70 million, give or take. We were able to get to 75, which you'll see in a moment in our scenario 1, to get us back up against that policy guideline. And that's using a level debt service. No structuring. You might recall the last time we did a little structuring to make things work for the, I think it was the elementary school we did in 2019. We actually did a little bit of structuring to get in the market a little sooner than really the capacity allowed. Here, scenario 1, there's no structuring. What we did, though, just to show you, if we did a little bit of structuring, like we've done in the past, we did a scenario 2, so we'll show you what that looks like. Of course, by doing that scenario, we actually create more capacity because, again, we didn't pay debt service for a couple years. So we did a scenario 3 to say, okay, if we were to add that extra capacity to the $75 million, what does that look like? So I'll get into the numbers in a moment, but I just want to kind of give you a big picture where we're headed here. So scenario 1, we take our existing debt service, we add our potential 22 bonds. Basically, now keep in mind, we did $75 million for the project, but you might remember we don't issue bonds necessarily at par. Sometimes the buyers want a higher coupon and they're willing to pay us for that, so we issue bonds at a premium. So in order to create $75 million of project, we only had to issue $68 million under the current market. So that's why you see a little bit lower number. So that's not the amount going to the project fund. $75 million we go into the project fund. Just to give you a sense down there in the bullet at the bottom there, you'll see that with that 50 basis points, we're actually at a borrowing rate of 221, and that's not a typo. That's how low rates are right now. If we went to market today, we'd be below 2%. With a 50 basis point cushion, we're just slightly above 2%. Rates are really good. Debt to AV, again, adding $75 million, no problem. But again, on the debt service to expenditures, because we're doing level debt service, we're going to start paying principal immediately in 2023. You'll see that it bumps right up against that 12% number, but then quickly comes down. Again, as we're paying it off pretty rapidly, and you've got your other debt that's being paid down, and we've got the 2% growth in budget that we're looking at. So what is the affordability side? What does it cost in cash flow? How many dollars do we have to come up with, if any, to pay for that debt service? So again, we've took the existing school debt service. We have the projected new debt service at about $4.7 million per year. That's the $75 million. That gets us to a total debt service in 23 of $22.5 million. Again, I was using that $19.6 million number, which is the 2021 budgeted debt service for the schools. So the differential there is $2.9 million that would be required in 2023, $2.2 million in 24, $1.6 in 25, and then a little bit there in 26, basically before the debt service drops down back to that 19.6 million number. So you're roughly, if you add those 4 years together, you can see at the bottom there, it's 6.9, rounded up, it's $7 million of additional revenues you'd have to come up with in those years to basically pay debt service on $75 million level debt service that basically eats up the capacity for that 1 year, but then you figure you have capacity coming up after that. That's what the debt service graphic would look like. You can see the 3 years where you go above the debt service allocation. So the resulting capacity, if you issued that $75 million at 5%, there wouldn't be any in 23, because remember, we're right up against the line. But in 24, you have $17 million, in 25, you have $21 million, and then so on after that. If you use the 4% number, that 17 goes up to 19. So what we are going to do on the next scenario is basically do a structured scenario and see if we can issue that $75 million without an impact to the cash flow. In other words, let's see if we can get that $7 million number down. So what we did in the middle columns there, you'll see highlighted, is we did interest only in 23. So we didn't pay any principal back, it's interest only. We did a little bit of principal in 24, a little bit in 25, and a little more in 26. Not much, but a little bit more. And then we go to level debt service after that. So it's about $5.1 million after that. And what that does on a ratio basis, it does create a little bit of capacity, again, as I mentioned, in 23. You can see the differential between that light shade of brown and the blue bar. And what we were able to do is get that $7 million down to 1.4. I'll round up and say 1.5 million. So $700,000 in 23 instead of 2.9. $300,000 in '24 instead of $2.2 million, and then a couple $100,000 there in the next couple of years. So we're able to, by, again, delaying principal, interest only, we're able to get it down from about $7 million to $1.5 million. That's what the debt service looks like graphically. And we do create some more capacity there in '23. So you might say, well, can we add more to that 75? And at 5%, it's about $19.6 million, $21 million at 4%. So we said, okay, let's see what happens if we were to take that $21 million and add it to the $75 million. But let's not structure it. Let's not go overboard and go into structuring. Let's just see what it looks like. And we could run cases all night, but we just wanted to at least give you one more case. So now we're going from $75 million of project cost to $96 million, 96.4 to be exact. The debt service is basically jumps up to 6.5, round up, after the structuring there in the first few years. Again, debt to AV is fine. Debt service to expenditures now is right at that blue bar. And now we're back to that $7 million number. So it does that, and what's happened here, and there's a lot of numbers moving around, but case 2, we freed up a little debt service. Case 3, we put it back because we didn't structure again. We added that $21 million without structuring, and it goes up. It doesn't go to $2.9 million. It's basically $2.1 million, but it still around $7 million for the 4 years because it adds some of the dollars in the later years, 1.6, 1.5, 1.5. But we're able to get to $96 million, but we would need additional dollars there for 5 years. That's what the graphic looks like above that blue line. But what it does do is it costs you. And so what we're trying to show in this last slide is, I'm going to look at the second and third, the second column to the end there. Difference between the second and third case is $27 million. Basically, what that's saying is the $75 million case 2 between the case 3 where we add the additional $21 million, $21.4, it costs you $27 million because of the extra interest in debt service. A lot of numbers, and I've gone through that fairly quickly. But I'll pause there, Mr. Chairman, and see if anyone has any questions. I'm happy to go back to some of the slides and try to walk you back through them if you like.
Yeah, let me start off by saying, wow.
I know.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and go around the room. Supervisor Bowen?
At this last slide, if you look at the bottom line numbers between 2 and 3, there's only a difference of, $1.5 million.
Between 1 and 2, right. Mm-hmm. That's 1 and 2, which is the structure versus not structured case.
This
Oh,
and
between
this.
those two, I apologize. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
These two
26.7 versus 28.2.
So
right.
we're able to borrow $96 million at really a cost of $1.5 million.
Versus the structuring case of just 75.
Right.
Mm-hmm. As far as total debt service, yes.
At the end of whatever year this is,
Well, actually, no, I take it back. I'm sorry, I'm trying to do this on the fly. The case 2 is 95.2 million. I'm looking at the column here. If you look at the difference between the two, it's 95 versus 121, which is 2 versus 3. That's 26.667 million
okay,
difference.
I gotcha.
Sorry, yeah. I see what you're saying. You were looking at the differences between two differences. In order to add and get us to 96 million, it's 121.9 million versus 95.2 million.
Right.
And restructuring or structuring the debt could be all different kinds of ways, right?
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be years 2 to 4 or 5 to 20. It could be, we could structure it so we're never above the 10% line.
We could, the more you put, and we could run cases all day. The more you push principal out, the further out on the yield curve we go, the higher the interest rate, the higher the total cost is going to be, which is what we were trying to show a little bit here, is that the more we structure, the more it costs, which is really the difference between, 1 versus 2. The little bit of structuring only costs us $1.6 million to do 1 versus 2, which was basically $75 million in both cases, but it's $7 million over 4 years versus $1.6 million over 4 years.
So a lot of these graphs are done at 4%, and you're showing that we can probably get 2.21 or less.
And all these numbers that you see on the last page were at the 2.21.
Okay.
The biggest thing that, as we talked to Davenport about these numbers, is there is the ability to add capacity. That capacity comes at a cost of added interest over time. And that's what the board will need to discuss, because if we add capacity, it adds, as Courtney pointed out, in this scenario, it adds about $7 million that we have to come up with somewhere. It's either through tax increases or it's through using some of the pennies that we're already setting aside for school capital. It's an offset.
So up until today, all the schools have been asking us for is 75 million. How much are they asking?
Well, the number that we've heard, we had the joint meeting a couple of months ago, and the scenario was approximately $100 million project at Christiansburg High School. It's our understanding that number may be somewhat less than that, but it's still north of 75 million. As Courtney mentioned at the beginning, the reason we started with 75 was the last time we had an update, which was when we borrowed the money for the elementary school projects. We had looked at capacity then, and capacity was 70 million plus or minus. So we said, okay, well, let's look at that. We knew the budget hadn't grown. Let's look at 75. They plugged the numbers in, and that pretty much looked like a number that would work. But then as we saw that ability to add some debt, we had some capacity depending on structure. Is okay, well, let's play with the structure a little bit and see how hard we can push it. 75 with some structure is pretty easily doable. The bigger 96.4 number is doable, but it's going to require some very strong fiscal decisions by the board.
So what would just one scenario for me, the 75 structured now, but I know that the engineering's going on, but groundbreaking and when they need all the cash for the schools is what year?
Early 2022.
Early.
In order, and I know the schools are here as well, but I believe what we talked about in our liaison meeting last week is they need to be in a position when they go out to bid, which they hope to do late 21, early 22, they need to be in a position to award a contract to have the funds secured. So at that point is when we'd have to say, there's where the money is. So we're looking at early 22, and I think that was the example using the 50 basis points.
We assumed a January closing for all the numbers.
Yeah. I'm all about borrowing as much money right now as possible because inflation is probably going to go on and these rates are going to go up over time when they need the money. It's just going to be more and more expensive. So I know it's not going to happen today, whatever we do decide, but rates are just wonderfully low at this point. Thank you.
Supervisor Blevins?
So that'll put us at the maximum capacity if we do the 96, and how will that affect our bond rating?
We'll be at that level, and that's the chart I've got up on the graph now. That's where we would be under scenario 3. You can see we'd be in good shape.
I'm sorry, you didn't ask this question,
No.
but the challenge, and that was, when we work with Courtney, that's always the first thing we talk about, is we are not going to do anything to create challenges to the bond rating. That's critical because that's what gets us the low interest rates to start with. The challenge with that scenario is if you max out the capacity, that leaves no capacity for any county projects for at least 3 to 5 years.
That puts us out at 24 at the earliest for additional capacity.
Okay, 2 years.
So,
Or any other emergencies
right,
that may come up.
right.
And this is all at, considering you're estimating at 4% interest, and right now it's 2.2? Is that
That's with a 50 basis point cushion.
with
at
the
2.2.
points? Okay. And also, you're looking at projected, if everything goes good, a 2% increase in our growth revenue.
The calculations going forward took your budget for this year, and then we grew it 2% per year from 23 out,
Okay.
in terms of, in order to get this calculation.
So those will be hard decisions. Okay. That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Vice Chair Biggs?
I don't really have a question, but I guess, when we had the liaison meeting, one of the things that I really want to know is how much money the schools are going to get that they can use for renovations so that we can actually plan in a really good manner how to fund Christiansburg High School. So like, that would, if they can get a certain amount of money, that to me would impact what we're looking at here. And the other scenario, of course, is, if we have to come up with, money that we don't have, that's going to have to come back to the board to consider a tax increase or whatever. So to me, what I need is I need to know how much it's going to cost. I need to know how much money they can get, and I need to know what recommendation that you, as our financial advisors, would recommend, knowing all of the information, like Supervisor Levin said. What if we have another roof fall in? What if the roof falls in here? I mean, we have to be thinking about the whole picture, and we really want to get Christiansburg High School done. We really want to do that.
Right.
But you got to think about everything coming together. And so that's what I look to you for, because
No, absolutely. And the one good thing about this scenario is that it's not like it was years ago when we did Blacksburg and
Yeah.
and knew that it was going to be at least 3 or more years before we had any capacity. And then, of course, then the last thing you want is that wonderful economic development prospect knocking on the door saying, "Hey, can you help me out here?" And we're like, "Sorry, we don't have the room or capacity to do that." So from a capacity standpoint, it's definitely doable. And as Craig said, it's doable. But then when you look at the affordability side of it, it means you've got to find some dollars to pay for it. And that's the part I'd love to help you with, but that's the tricky part, and that's the decision point. Is that we can make this, we can make this work, we can make it work without hurting our bond rating. And interest rates are phenomenal right now. And we're actually doing a bond sale for Loudoun County tomorrow, and we're expecting their interest rates to be in the 150 to 175 range.
wow.
I mean, it's crazy. Market is just strong out there. So it is a good time to borrow. We did build in 50 basis points because we don't know where we're going to be in January, which is what we were assuming it would, be that long before you get plans together. I mean, have I borrowed money before for clients before they've actually decided what they're going to do? Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It can be done. But you want to make sure that you've got enough, because the last thing you want to do is pay us again to go out and borrow more money
Yeah.
and go out a second time. But interest rates are good. I cannot argue with that.
Yeah. Thank you. It's putting all the pieces together. Thank you.
Supervisor DeMotts?
What's the dollar amount difference between 10% and 12% debt to expenditures ratio?
In terms of the difference, like on the,
I'm thinking it might be around 4% or 4 million. If we're at 10%,
are you talking about debt service? Or are you talking about total borrowing?
I'm talking about your debt service as a percentage of expenditures.
I think I see what you're asking.
That number come to mind, Angie?
Yeah,
I don't think it's necessarily critical for this discussion. you're not looking for a decision of any sort from us tonight. This is
This
informative.
is all, and I was going to say
This is
that.
more information.
This-
I would
Yes,
say.
this is
Yeah,
all
this is really trying
information.
to kind of give you a big picture overview of kind of where things are. And I'm sorry I don't have the number top
That's
of my
okay.
head. But
It would be helpful.
Had my analyst here, he could rattle it right
if-
off.
If somebody is able to get, I'm like back of the napkin math here, calculating it at around $4 million. I could be way, way, way wrong. So it would be very helpful for me, just as I'm processing this information, to know that.
can come up with that
I should have started with Courtney. It's really great to see you. It's been a
Thank
long
you. It's
time.
great to see you again. Absolutely.
Sorry, that was
That's
rude
all
of
right.
me.
Yeah, just throw me a curveball. That's all right.
Sorry.
Alex, my analyst, would have hit it out of the park, so
Yeah,
sorry. I
back,
wasn't here.
just doing back of the head math, which is scary
Oh,
for
boy.
me, that's not too far off. It's probably within $1 million, but yeah.
All right. Go me.
2%.
So
Yeah.
we're looking at this as something that we are probably going to need to consider taking action on in about 7-8 months, early part of 2022, correct?
If not sooner, sounds like. Depends on, I guess it depends on planning, when the plans come together.
When we talked to the schools in the liaison meeting last week, they're hoping to have something August, September timeframe that we could do a joint meeting to really get our arms around, and then you guys can start making some decisions.
Okay. And I just know that the reason that I asked that is 7 months, or even if we're looking at a timeline of, say, 4 or 5 months from now, there's so much volatility in the various markets, and the building materials market is something that is of extreme concern as we're looking at a remodeling project. So it's good to know that we have the ability to go in a few different directions. It will be very interesting. I appreciate the question about what that does to our bond rating. It'll be very interesting to monitor that as we move forward, because I think that's very important to everybody. It's why we're able to borrow at such attractive rates.
Exactly, and this number doesn't give me pause at all from a credit standpoint. It's the debt service number that you guys are gonna have to figure out how you pay for it. We put 50 basis points in there. If you look at those who predict 10-year treasury, which is kind of a bogey I use as a taxable rate, tax exempts don't always follow as they move up and down, but it's pretty close, pretty good bogey. Those that do the predicting on Wall Street are predicting that by the end of the year, we should be around 2% in terms of 10-year treasury. We're at 160 right now. It's not exactly 50 basis points, but kind of in that ballpark. So that's, we realistically could be at that 221 number in January. We could be higher, we could be lower. So we didn't go overly conservative with a 50 basis point. I think that's very possibly realistic.
Yeah. Well, I think this gives us some options, some flexibility, and then also gives us some good information to have a conversation about what are the realistic options for us to do moving forward in terms of coming up with additional money to pay for debt service. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Supervisor Shepherd.
April kind of hit on the question I had, and appreciate you for coming in for the presentation. My question is probably more for the schools. I was just curious, that $100 million estimate, or north of 95 or 75 million, is that a pre-COVID materials price? Because like a lot of materials are 200-300% higher now. But I'm sure that'd be a tough question to answer. So that's all I have.
Supervisor King.
Just a couple of questions. I mean, I like to bring up what Darrell just brought up, is that $96.4 million, is that for the material where the pandemic hit and everything has gone up?
That's just, that 96.4 has no relation to any number from the schools. It was just when we were looking at the scenarios, if we maxed out the structure, how much capacity could we push to, and it's about 96.4 million. That's just numbers on our side. That has nothing to do with what the schools are proposing.
Oh, so they're not asking for 96.4?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. That was to see if, as I call it, if we maxed out with structure and capacity, what could we push it out to? And it's about 96.4 million.
So even if we do this school project, we still have capacity to do what the county needs to do?
We wouldn't at 96.4, no.
Uh,
We wouldn't at 96.4. We would at 75. 75 or somewhere in that area, yes.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to be optimistic here. I'm thinking that probably by September, when all the federal unemployment money runs out and everybody goes back to work, the supplies will come back, and maybe the cost of supplies and materials will go down, but unfortunately, the interest rate probably will rise, so probably be real lucky if it's a wash, but I think everybody pretty much covered it. Is there any other follow-ups? You have a follow-up?
Yeah. So the last time you were here, I think somebody asked the question, gosh, forbid another roof collapsed, would that affect our bond rating? You said probably not, only because, you know, it's a temporary thing. It's not like we've changed our policy and intentionally borrowed, you know, $120 million. You know, that's two
I
different
agree.
things.
It's similar to what happened the last time, and I would hope that anything that were to happen wouldn't be a $100 million
No,
price
right.
tag,
I'm
right?
just
Like we
saying.
had the last time. So, yeah, I think that's true. I mean, the agencies would give us, a break.
And then the other question is, Craig, if you could talk about the county needs, like what Todd was saying, you know, have we already earmarked all of our present projects and set aside the monies for them?
No, we've talked about the Auburn Park and Reiner. We've got money set aside for the grading. We have not set aside any money beyond the grading. A project that's come up several times in discussions is the Shawsville Rescue Squad, a new facility for Shawsville. There's no money earmarked for that project. And then the projects that we talked about early in the year related to economic development and needing additional space for economic development in the future. There's no dollars set aside for that either.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have another question? Did you have a question? No. Any more follow-ups? No? Well, we appreciate the heads up on this, Courtney. Sorry I didn't recognize you on Zoom the other day. You changed your look, so,
Absolutely. Great seeing everyone.
yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Courtney.
All right, I believe next up is the American Rescue Plan Act 2021. I believe Mark is here. And I guess this is your first meeting since you got bumped up.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, I think part of Mark's promotion means he has to sit in on a webinar a day on the American Rescue Plan, because between NACO, VACO, National League of Cities, who am I leaving out?
I hope you didn't tell him that before he was promoted.
We said there'd be additional duties as may be assigned, so.
Right. All right, so tonight I wanted to give you a little bit of an update. A few months ago, I came and talked to you about the American Rescue Plan, and we had some initial guidance on what was going on. We have more guidance, so I'm going to give you an update on what we know at this point. And this first slide is sort of a recap of what we've already talked about. So the state and local coronavirus fiscal recovery funds legislation, which was part of the American Rescue Plan, was signed into law on March 11th this year. The bill included $65.1 billion in direct aid to counties. That was different than what had happened through the CARES Act funding. These funds will not go through the state. Towns and cities will receive their own allocation. Public schools will receive their own allocation. and Montgomery County's proposed allocation and initial guidance has been provided by the U.S. Treasury. And I'm going to talk a little more on the next couple slides about what that is. There's an additional $1.5 billion that is provided over 2 years for counties with public lands. Montgomery County is one of those. These funds will be distributed over 2 years based on the federal fiscal year, and it will have very broad uses, unlike these monies that are very specific in how we can use them. These funds can be used for any governmental purpose with the exception of lobbying activities. The distribution formula is still being worked on, and it is not based on any prior distribution formula. So there had been previous distribution formulas on how the county received secure rural funds, particularly on the school side, and there was a funding formula for how we receive PILT money. The county as a whole doesn't receive a lot of money in that area, so I don't expect a lot of money to come out of this. The one thing that's nice about this, any money that we do get has a very broad use. Counties will receive the monies in 2 allocations, 50% within 60 days of March 11th, and 50% no earlier than 12 months from the first payment. When I did the presentation back in March, the original allocation number was 19 million, 19.1, and the allocation ended up being 19.1, but it was actually $29,000 higher than the original estimate, which is a good thing. The county applied for the monies on March 12th and received half of it, 9.6 million, on 5/19 of this month. There are many ways that the American Rescue Plan funds can be used. Currently, the eligible uses include supporting the public health response, addressing the negative economic impacts caused by the public health emergency, serving the hardest hit communities and families, replacing lost public sector revenue due to the public health emergency, providing premium pay to essential workers, and investing in infrastructure, which includes water and sewer systems and broadband. What I can tell you is there's additional federal guidance currently being developed on this, and I'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide. So there's some key dates related to the recovery fund. January 27th was the actual date in 2020 of the declaration of the public health crisis. March 3rd of 2021 is the beginning of the recovery fund covered period. Now what that means is expenses are eligible for items that are purchased or services that are provided beginning March 3rd. So you can't go back anytime before March 3rd. There is one exception, and that is premium pay, because you can do retro pay on premium pay, and that's the only thing that you can go back beyond that March 3rd time period. May 10th, U.S. Treasury issued an interim final rule on the recovery fund, and Treasury has allowed 60 days for feedback, upon which that rule will then become final. So additional federal guidance is still being developed. They're asking for input after they put the initial rule out. The deadline to provide that feedback is July 9th of 2021. December 31, 2024, that's when the recovery funds must be obligated, not incurred. What that means is that we have to have contracts signed and the work being planned to be done no later than that date. However, we still have until December 31, 2026 to spend the money and get all the work done. So the money must be spent and all work and performance must be completed by December 31, 2026. Based on county needs, staff is exploring the use of these funds for the following items: investing in broadband infrastructure, investing in water and sewer infrastructure, potentially providing paid sick leave and family medical leave to public employees. That would be the board extending the sick leave usage for COVID-related illnesses. Further capital investments in public facilities that meet the pandemic operational needs. And then there's a potential for a revenue loss component, which those dollars can be used for any purpose. There's actually 4 calculation periods for that revenue loss calculation. We can calculate 4 separate times. The first time that we can do that is December 31st, 2020. Then we can do it again every year after that, so December 31, 2021, then 22, and then 23. So even if we do the first revenue loss calculation for the first period and we don't show a revenue loss, we still have an opportunity to recalculate and see what that number would be in the future, and then those monies could be used for any purpose. Somebody had asked me at one point whether or not we could look at individual revenues, and if we had an individual category of revenue that was down, could we use that and call that a revenue loss? And the answer is no. You have to use the total revenue, and it's a very specific number that is based on the U.S. Census, what number we would provide to the U.S. Census. So there's specific guidance on what falls into that revenue category, and it's based on the total revenue for general government functions for the entire entity. We do have a revenue calculation formula that's been provided. We're still working on it to see whether or not we can show a revenue loss for the first period. General infrastructure spending is not covered as an eligible use outside of water, sewer, and broadband investments. However, if we are able to show that we have a revenue loss, then under the revenue loss provision, we would be able to use that money for just about any purpose. There's been a lot of talk about investing in the water, sewer, and broadband, so I'll talk a little bit about that. Localities may invest in improvements to drinking water infrastructure, including building or upgrading facilities for the transmission, distribution, and storage. Localities may invest in improvements to wastewater infrastructure, including constructing publicly owned treatment infrastructure and managing and treating stormwater and subsurface drainage water. That was one of the things that was talked about a lot in these webinars and Zoom meetings, was whether or not stormwater could be a use, and it can be. As far as broadband is concerned, localities may invest in broadband infrastructure to address unserved or underserved populations. And they have some requirements they would like you to meet. So it's lacking a wireline connection that reliably delivers minimum speeds of 20 megabits per second download and 3 megabits on upload. And then projects should be upgraded to deliver 100 megabits per second download speed and 100 megabits per second upload speeds, unless it's impractical based on topography, geography, or financial cost. One thing that I did see and that kind of, gives me a little bit of concern about broadband is that the state has said that they're receiving money, specifically $4.3 billion through this program. And part of that money is going to be used at the state level for broadband. And one of the things that they have said is that they have a plan to fully deploy broadband across Virginia, and that they would accelerate their 10-year plan and do it over 18 months. Now, I don't know how possible that is, but the one thing that makes us need to think about anyway is we'll have to have some coordination, because you certainly don't want to duplicate services, and you want to maximize the use of these money. So we don't want to be spending money on broadband if the state is going to do the exact same thing. So I've talked a little bit with Brian, and we're going to talk as a team to try and figure out what exactly that means and how we can best manage that, if we're going to look at broadband as a mechanism to use these funds. And that's pretty much what I have tonight, and I'll be glad to answer any questions y'all may have.
Oh, good. 'Cause I'm sure we've got some. Supervisor King, you have any questions for Mark?
I don't have no question, but thank you for coming.
Supervisor Shepherd?
Right back into the broadband question. If we wait on the state, according to what you said earlier, we have until 2024 and 2026 to spend that? Is that money?
Yeah, so 2024, I mean, a lot of what has been discussed is, they want us to be prudent, with the money. So, we just received the money. They want us to really, in the discussions, from the different groups, whether it's NACO or GFOA, this is a rare thing. I don't know that we will see something like this again. And so we want to take this opportunity to really think through how to best utilize this money, because, I can't ever remember something like this happening in my lifetime, and, I don't know that it'll ever happen again. So this is a one-time shot to really make some major infrastructure changes that's going to help our community and other communities across Virginia for the next 30 or 40 years. So, I don't know that we need to jump the gun too soon. I think we should plan properly and figure out how to maximize these dollars.
One other thing I wanted to say is I want to throw this in there just so I don't let you forget. We have people that live on Mount Zion Road and Glade Road that don't have potable water. So I'd like to put my hat in the ring for some of that money for water lines. That's all I have.
Thank you. Supervisor DeMonts.
I've got a couple of questions. Do you mind terribly to go back in your slideshow to your second slide? And I'll go slide by slide.
Okay.
On the second slide, you said that towns and cities will receive their own allocation, public schools will receive their own allocation. Specifically for towns and cities, is it population-based? Is there a threshold, towns and cities over X number of people receive it?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, I focus mostly on the monies that came to the county, but.
So we're far enough over it that it's not of concern if the population was to drop or anything like that?
No, the amount of money that we're getting is set.
Okay.
Okay. The towns and the cities, they got an allocation just like, we did. I don't know what the towns and cities numbers are, but I could certainly look them up for you and tell you exactly what each locality received.
Populations were part of the equation, but it wasn't solely based on population.
Okay. And I asked that I know when we had the CARES Act funding, there was some confusion about why the county did it this way or that way or what have you. So I think this is much
Everybody got their
smoother
own
for
pot this
us.
time, yes.
Right.
And much clearer. And then on slide number 4, on serving the hardest hit communities and families, is this human-based? Is this dollar-based? How are we determining who's the hardest hit communities and families?
I actually have the answer for you on
Ooh,
that.
yay.
So for serving the hardest hit communities, it's addressing health disparities. So it's funding for community health workers, public benefits, navigators, remediation of lead paint, community violence intervention programs, investments in affordable housing, which is services for homelessness, affordable housing development, housing vouchers, residential counseling, and navigation assistance to facilitate moves. Addressing educational disparities, new and expanded early learning services, additional resources for high poverty school districts, educational services like tutoring and after-school programs, promoting healthy childhood environments, new and expanded high-quality childcare, home visiting programs for families with young children, and services for child welfare-involved families and foster youth. One thing I'll note about all that stuff that I just said, to use funds in this particular area requires a qualified census tract or other identified populations that are in areas disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And so there are certain rules and regulations on what qualifies for that. So you'd have to have not just affordable housing, say for an example, but you'd have to be able to show that the area in which the affordable housing was linked specifically to a census tract area that was designated for that purpose. Does that make sense?
And I'm glad you used affordable housing as your example. I feel like you're reading my mind. It would be interesting to possibly consider if there are any parts of our community that might qualify for looking at affordable housing. Of course, the other health disparities and educational disparities are extremely important as well. But we have the housing study that has recently been released. It would be interesting if we could use that data to see if maybe that's an avenue. And then on the next slide, are we planning on giving any feedback by the deadline of July 9th?
That's up to the board.
Okay.
I mean, as we're going through this, we're having discussions about it. As questions come up, I have the opportunity to send those to NACO and to other organizations that have direct contacts with the feds to get those answers. And so, as we went through this, particularly like with the revenue calculation formula, I was asking questions on how this works so that I can, figure out, because, that revenue calculation number, if we're able to use that, that's probably one of the better avenues, because you're not really restricted, but you still have to be able to show that you have that loss in order to do that.
I appreciate that you're doing that. I know that all of our staff have had to take on some very interesting and unique challenges in the way that you opened your presentation by talking about how this is once in a lifetime, shows that you're approaching it with a really optimistic, positive state of mind. So I really appreciate that you're the one that's on the case for us. Final question, and it's really just, I need a definition of what exactly this verbiage means. Next slide. Further capital investments in public facilities to meet pandemic operational needs. Right. What does that mean?
So basically what that means is that in order to qualify for a lot of these things, you have to be able to show that the reason that you're spending the money is directly related to the pandemic. So in other words, if we had to fix the boardroom, for example, because of making it better for social distancing, and we had to spend money because of the pandemic, then you could use it for infrastructure from that way, because there's a direct link between how you're using the money and that it's linked directly to the pandemic. If you were to try and use it for infrastructure where, you were planning to do something anyway, or you had a need in the community, you can't do that unless you can show that the pandemic caused the need.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Vice Chair Biggs.
Okay, well, we spent a long time Friday in our VACO board meeting talking about this, and I know you're very familiar with what's going on. VACO wants counties to give back ideas directly to VACO about what they're thinking about. And some of the things that, I'm just throwing these questions out to get us thinking. They wanted to know what process that we plan to use to decide on how our county will deploy its fiscal recovery funds. Like, is it going to be, involving staff and board together to sort of see what kind of ideas we might have too, that kind of thing? We have more leeway to plan, and we really need to, like it's been said, we really need to take this opportunity and really plan for the future with this money. So anything that we come up with that we want to share, we need to send to them. So I had an opportunity to talk to a fellow supervisor today in Rockingham County. I did share this with Craig, Billy Kiger, and, they've come up with some really creative things. We have to make sure they're okay. But one of the things I wondered, based on what he talked about, can we do anything with the Shawsville Rescue Squad at all as a health issue, or as one of the things they did, they actually built a facility for giving vaccinations, and they're going to keep that facility for the future when they have, I guess, their health department do any kind of thing like that. Is there any way to come up with a creative idea to look at that? Like, I don't know. It made me start thinking, like, can we really, look at, I know they have regulations, but I think we're going to have to be creative, like with some of our thinking. So that was one of the things I thought about. And another thing that VACO is interested in is, do we have any kind of direction that we'd like to see the state spend their money on? Another thought is sort of like, I think was referred to before, about planning. Like, wouldn't it be nice to know this time around what the schools were going to do, what we were going to do, what the two towns? We have time to talk about these things. And so I'm just sort of throwing out thoughts to get us thinking about, how we might want to go about this. And anything that you guys find out, with all these webinars, would be really beneficial that, share along the way in case we can't all be going to the webinars at the same time. But
Right.
I just think it's fascinating. I mean, I'm really excited about this because it's a once in a lifetime, and I think we can do so much for our county and for our citizens. I'm just really excited about it. So
Yeah, I think as we go through this, when I find out more information, we'll provide that information
Yeah,
to
yeah.
the board. We're in early days with this. I mean, we just received the money. They're still working on the guidance to make sure. I mean, there's a lot of questions being asked right now about how they can utilize this money. And so hopefully we'll have more clarity once we hit the deadline and get that final rule.
Yeah, there's just things out there I never thought about, like purchasing a truck that can sanitize a building in 20 minutes. That's one of the things Rockingham County did. I didn't even know such a truck existed. I mean, so that's why I think the sharing component of this, finding out what others are finding out, is going to be really important.
And I think we will certainly, we've talked about this. We're having a meeting later this week as staff again. You ask who's going to be involved. The board will absolutely be at the table when we have these discussions. And my vision is probably in several weeks, we'll have a work session as part of a board meeting, or we may just try to do something independent and say, let's all brainstorm a little bit.
Yeah.
Come up, everything we come up with may or may not qualify, but let's brainstorm, because that's what we're talking about internally as well. Is it is a once in a career opportunity to make an investment in our community, and let's make dang sure we're doing it as best we can and serving the most people that we can. So it is nice that we don't, the challenge with the CARES money was we had a chunk of money and we had to spend it by a deadline, and that deadline was fast. This one, we have an opportunity to vet it out, talk about it, talk with legal counsel, talk with Congress. They're the ones who wrote the law on this, and make sure we're all on the same page before we go out and make these investments.
Yeah, and I think they heard that we wanted flexibility. And like Senator Warner said, invest wisely and well, because this is a once in a lifetime. So
Yep.
that's all I had, just get us thinking.
Supervisor Blevins.
Along the lines of Supervisor Biggs, thinking about the negative economic impacts of public health emergencies, I'm thinking the same thing with our rescue and fire. A lot of our volunteer rescues were college kids, and when they closed down the college, we lost a lot of those personnel that were volunteer. So I'm thinking along those same guidelines of ways that we could help use it through the rescue squad with our first responders, even equipment, and for Shawsville, exactly being creative, thinking about how we can utilize that. And it's all, obviously those were first responders for COVID, equipment, services, and resources for the people. Along with Supervisor DeMott's talking about hardest hit communities and families, with that we could look at our social services, our human resources, and things of that in mental health. So that's what I would like to look at, ways that we could, and even with the court systems in the Commonwealth, they're backlogged with their court cases and things, jury trials and all getting back up, how we can help alleviate that and get everybody caught back up. So those would be good ways to utilize that one-time money. And I do agree that we'd like to know for sure what the school's getting. And as Supervisor DeMott said, that make sure everybody understands that the school will get their allotment, the towns will get their allotment, and then this will be county's allotment for each locality, for each of us to decide what best we can do within those guidelines. But I do believe that great planning, and with the state already giving so much money for the broadband, we don't want to do something that they're already covered. So we want to know what they're going to give, and that way we can wisely use that money elsewhere, and especially for our first responders. And we were fortunate with the CARES Act to give our police, that money, and we can go back and look too at other essential workers and take care of our citizens that had to step up and serve. And for the, child care, I don't know if you saw in the news, child care is a huge thing, and so utilizing some of that money to serve our community and those that are hardest hit. Thank you for your presentation.
Supervisor Bone.
As I'm looking at my questions, I do want to speak to one of the questions that you asked, Mark. And you said census tracts. There are quite a few census tracts that are quite eligible. That comes from my Habitat for Humanity experience. So downtown Blacksburg, There's quite a few census tract opportunities down there. And I'm not saying Blacksburg is the only place by any means, but lots of opportunity in our county for affordable housing. I do want to ask the question, so VDOT gets the state money, this nothing would go towards VDOT efforts.
As far as this money is concerned,
this money.
this is the county's money to do.
Yep, whatever we want.
Whatever you
If we
want
wanted to
within
spend
the-
it on roads, we could, but that's not the objective.
Well, I mean, again, you'd have to follow the guidelines that they've set forth.
Right.
But you can use this money for whatever purpose you want within the guidelines provided by Treasury.
So one of the things, based on everybody, quite a few people mentioning, the towns are getting money, the schools are getting money. If we can have everybody's dollar make $4 or $3 to make something within Christiansburg or something within Blacksburg to solve several different customers or whatever you want to call it, it is to our advantage to do something like that. Okay. As far as Supervisor Shepherd, I'm all about if we could stroke a check and get people potable water now, I would be all about that. It reminded me of some stories when I was with Habitat. There's some communities in the Hollers and Giles and probably here in Montgomery County that never had dental services. I'm sure COVID compromised lots of those kinds of opportunities so that if we can get people healthier in places where they don't have what we're used to within most people in Montgomery County, I would encourage us to do some social service investigating to make sure that we are helping people. On slide 6, on your potential revenue loss, we didn't lose any revenue.
Well, I can't say that for certain because the formula that they use is it goes back to the last full fiscal year, and then the way that they allow it. So it's the last full fiscal year prior to the pandemic. That becomes your base year, and then you have the opportunity. There's two ways you can do it. You can take our average revenue growth over the 3 years and use that in their formula, or 4.1%. When I did my initial calculation, the county's revenue doesn't grow at 4.1%. So it's in our advantage to use that marker that they have, which is based on it's actually based on a 2015 number. That was the latest information that they had, which is the average rate of growth across the nation. So some of the localities that are growing at a much faster pace are helping us in that calculation. And then what they do is they take that number, convert it to a calendar year number, and then extend it out on a formula. And I won't get into the details on it, but the first calculation is based on December 31st, 2020. So it's actually taking our fiscal year, converting it to the revenues over a calendar year, and then comparing it to that 4.1% growth. So right now, I don't have the numbers, so I can't tell you what it would be, but if we did have a revenue loss, it would be small. It wouldn't be, I don't think it would be significant, just based on how our revenues have grown over the past several years. But I think that there would be more potential for that particular use maybe a year or two down the road, depending upon how we fare coming out of this. But I don't know. We'd have to calculate it. They've said you have 4 opportunities to calculate this to be able to show that revenue loss.
Interesting. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Mark, on that last page, you had written down here, lacking a wireline connection that reliably delivers minimum speeds. I think I know the answer, but they're not expecting us to where there is no wire to put wire.
No, they're just, that's that's their bottom line,
Okay.
So if there's nothing there, they want you to put the stuff in and try and get it up to 100, on both sides.
Yeah, and I figured that was the answer, because somewhere else in here, I think they said mentioned something about, topography or whatever, referenced it to, you have to do what you got to do. But kind of on the lines that Sarah was just talking about, as I recall, back in January of 2020, I think you gave us pretty much the best revenue picture I think that we've ever seen, and then it just went downhill from that. So that's not going to help us out
Well,
in this situation.
I'll be honest with you, there's some weird stuff going on right now as we speak. I'm getting sales tax numbers that are through the roof. The last month and the month that, like last month, we got 1.4 million undistributed. And that's a number that we normally only get in like February based on our December collections. So to get that for a May number is crazy.
And if I can interrupt there too, I had the opportunity to talk to the UPS driver who stopped by our house the other night dropping off a package, and he said it's crazier than any Christmas he ever remembers. He said,
How about Valentine's Day? That's their busiest day.
He said it was just crazy how many houses he was going to every day, and that they were having trouble keeping up. And if you look at the UPS trucks around town, many of them have trailers on them now, which is what they do with the holiday season. So everybody's gone online, unfortunately for the local retailers, but there's a whole lot of shopping going on.
And several things that you have talked about, you kind of based them on census. When will we have those hard numbers?
Well, I think we provide a census number every year. I think it's done.
So this is not the federal census.
Well, we provide a census number every year, but it's not particularly that number. It's utilizing the guidelines from the U.S. Census on how you calculate that number converted to this new formula that they have. So it's, our census number is a fiscal year number, and this number that we're going to be providing is going to be a calendar year number, kind of converted. So it's just taking the principles of what you're allowed to, and what revenues are required for the census, but over a different time period.
Okay. I know several people have mentioned fire and rescue certainly being some area that I would think could easily be related to COVID or any other disease that might come along in the future, because we are not just needing some infrastructure on fire and rescue buildings, but we need more volunteers. As Supervisor Blevins indicated, that we get a lot of volunteers from Virginia Tech and probably some from Radford, which are very much appreciated. But we are going to have to move on some other things, and it sure would be good to use some of this money for that, and especially if it could be used for not just, and I thought you said somewhere in here about basic making improvements or repairs to some infrastructure, but if we can somehow connect that to the Charlottesville Rescue Squad, which is in very bad need of replacement.
We need to
not
make it a
upgrade.
vaccination center.
And make it a vaccination center. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that
That was
the
good.
big issue is we need to be able to show and be able to have that, whatever we do, auditable, that wherever we invested our money, that we can show the link that the pandemic presented us with the need to do this. I think that if it was something that needed to be done, regardless of the pandemic, I think we would have a hard time making that case. But as long as we can show that because of the pandemic, we had to do this infrastructure improvement, then I think you would be okay.
Well, you make me happy, then you make me sad. So I don't know where to
Just trying
what
to be
feel
realistic.
right. Don't know what to feel right now. But I know that with the CARES money, we were able to through the task force buy a lot of equipment that was needed. Ambulances. Well, I don't know. Ambulances got to be parked somewhere when they're not out on call. But has that generated any other questions? Well, I appreciate you emphasizing this windfall. and I think everybody else has chimed in. Yeah, I don't think we'll ever see this again myself. We really, really got to make smart decisions, and I really appreciate your comment, especially on the broadband. When the state's got $1 billion something to throw into broadband, let's see what they can do so we can do more with what we have. So that's very smart. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair and board members, thank you for your time this evening on these two presentations. I know we took a while, but both these topics are critical matters for the board as we go into the months ahead. So we wanted to give you an update on both of them. So thank you for that.
All right, next up is going to be our public address. And just some quick reminders. Public address, you'll get 4 minutes to speak. All comments need to be directed to the board. The board will not be responding to any comments because this is our time to hear you, not for you to hear us. When you come up, you need to provide your name and address, and I think that's pretty much it, all you need to know, and very quick. Now, we have 3 people that have signed up already, so I'm just going to go down the list, and first one up is Larry Vaughn.
Good evening. I'm Larry Vaughn, 1267 Snapdragon Lane. Even after the revision of the original SUP application, the Planning Department had received insufficient information to make a recommendation to the Planning Commission. That is not a sign of a quality application. The Planning Commission recommends to deny this SUP. The need for the site was not explained in the original application and has only been vaguely elaborated upon since. I have talked to businesses since the last meeting that do concrete recycling. One has a place to dump the fines and mixed materials. Of course, this inert debris site won't allow mixed materials to be dumped. Does New River Recycling intend to dump dusty fine material in this inert debris site? They never explain that. The dust issues with fines are different than that with larger rubble. Other concrete recyclers get by without a disposal site. New River Recycling hasn't demonstrated that it cannot function without the inert fill site it requests. It has not made a good case on its own behalf and has shown no consideration for the nuisance it will become to its neighbors. It is not an application worthy of being approved. I think there are market solutions to this that don't require this inert debris site. A sliding scale with higher fees for poorly segregated or poor quality incoming debris is a good solution. A base charge of $73 per truck instead of the $30 per truck that was introduced at the last meeting would pay for transporting the fines to a regional landfill or other material that they considered inappropriate if they were trying to reach a 90% recycling rate. And I'd like to note that 12% of MRSWA's waste is construction waste, and about half of the construction waste going to New River Resource Authority is inert debris. Even big sections of bridges go in there. So the Dublin site does take inert debris. This is an economic issue, an economic question. Concrete and asphalt reprocessors I've talked to have a sliding fee from $25 to hundreds of dollars per truck, depending upon the quality of material. This is just the way business is done. It's a very feasible solution. The proposed use of the hollow on A1 land as an inert fill is not compatible with the surrounding development. And an applicant who violates the county code on the site of a pending SUP during deliberation of an SUP should not be granted that SUP. Through his companies, Mr. Phillips act like this area is his private sandbox to play in, and in fact, Mr. Phillips owns all that land in the middle of us. So he owns that sand, so to speak. But we, the private landowners, own the box, the sandbox. We were here first, and I think we deserve special consideration. In 1983, 3 supervisors were sufficient to pass a rezoning ordinance that moved that A1 parcel into M1, and there was no way to anticipate the consequences of that. But you can clearly see the implications if you approve this SUP tonight. Donna Robinette is one of the residences who lives the closest to this pile of inert debris. For health reasons, she couldn't be here tonight, and I'm not speaking on her behalf, but as an example, she is working 3 jobs, including sitting with a stroke patient, and then comes home and helps her spouse who had a stroke a year and a half ago. And if you approve this SUP, this is going to be a 10-hour a day, up to 10 hours a day, 6 days a week for 3 to 5 years that she will be enduring. And she doesn't have any personal friends, I believe, on the supervisors, and she doesn't own a business that is a contributor to a supervisor's campaign, as New River Recycling is, but I think she deserves special consideration, and I do believe this SUP should be denied. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up is Barbara DeVinny.
Barbara DeVinny, 1267 Snapdragon Lane, Christiansburg, Virginia.
Barbara, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I had noticed Mr. Vaughn was looking at his watch. When the little light right there turns yellow, that means you have 30 seconds left. I just thought I'd pass that along to everybody else so they don't have to worry about looking at their watch, but
Okay,
thank
great.
you. You can go ahead.
Thank you. I have concerns about the proposed landfill. First, if this recycling facility produces debris as an essential part of its processes, then that will continue to be true beyond the time that it takes to fill the first hollow with debris as requested by this special use permit application. It seems that approving this application will open the door to future SUP requests for additional landfill sites on this property. In our area, businesses can access an existing landfill. Adding other landfill sites around the county, like this one, and adding to the number of landfills in the county don't seem like a good choice for Montgomery County. Second, approving the operation of this landfill will bring many years of noisy truck traffic and possibly also toxic dust from crushed concrete to what has been a beautiful and peaceful residential and agricultural section of the county. I ask you to reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list is Michael Myers.
Sorry, I'm a little slow. I had back surgery a while back. I live at 2977 Spalding Road. So basically my neighbor and me, we are really, really close to the landfill site. Coming up Walton, the entranceway that he's prepared and asphalted, it looks nice. Other than the trucks and everything that we've continuously been talking about throughout this whole process, one of my biggest concerns that I've noticed the other day is the fill site that was at the top of Spalding Road, where there was some fill in right there before it turns into another road there. The telephone poles where they filled that in is actually, you can go over there and almost jump up and touch the power line where they buried the debris up to the pole and up onto the pole. And with my neighbor behind me having small children, I have children. I mean, that's a concern that, you know, they go down in the woods to play as kids do, you know. What can happen if that site looks like the top of the hill? You know, who's going to be responsible for that? I mean, is he going to be responsible? Is the county going to be responsible for allowing it? And the only other thing that I had to state that before you all make a decision on this that you might want to look into, because I did contact some attorneys to find out, but you know, we as citizens, we elected you all to be here for our behalf, not for businesses and and everybody, but everybody as a community's behalf. And the way that I see it, I mean, by talking to a lawyer, if you all approve this, not only with me being so close and not going through the whole aspects of finding out the hazards and everything else, I, as a landowner, being right there near it, I can actually make him take suit against him to purchase my land and home. And I've contacted multiple attorneys here in town to find this out. And I also could take suit against the county because the county allowed it without doing the proper research. You know, as she spoke about the dust, the debris, go to the top of Spalding Road, look at the hazard where he's built it up on a telephone pole. I mean, you can literally, a man can go and almost jump up there and touch it. I mean, that's a severe hazard. Whenever I built my house there, one of the telephone poles that were behind my house, the line hang low, I had to stop construction. Your building officials made me stop until that power line was moved or raised. I mean, what gives him the right to pile dirt up onto the pole and me have to, you know, stop building my house to have a pole moved and a power line raised? I mean, you know, I just hope you all make the right decision. I mean, I've spent my whole life working hard. I mean, you know, I'm 45 years old and I just had back surgery. And I'm going to be honest, every nail in my house, I nailed it myself. 4,000 square foot I built. It's my savings. In my bank account, I got $10,000 left to my name. All my money sits in that house. And if you give them the right, you're killing my value.
Thank you. We have nobody else left that is signed up, but you're welcome to come forward and state your name and your address, and you will get 4 minutes.
Chris Waltz, 1370 Rigby Street. I just came here tonight because I was bored, but I've heard some comments here from you all that are concerning. You know, and if you have any doubt why people hate you as the government, here's some prime examples. Let's take the money and spend it on the firehouse, but let's call it a vaccine center so we can. Christiansburg did that with their stupid signs downtown. Well, let's say the reason we're going to spend these thousands and thousands of dollars on the sign is, well, we'll get around it and go, we're going to wear a mask on it. So see, it's all legal. And let's max out the credit card because interest rates are low. That sounds like the 18-year-old college student that gets his first credit card, 0% interest for the first year, and maxes it out buying beer and bonds. That's why people don't like you, is because you sound irresponsible with our money. And make no mistake, we don't elect you because we think you're the best, the brightest, the smartest in the room. We elect you because you're one of two idiots that runs. That's all I have. Thanks.
It's good, because I was going to cut you off. Anybody else would like to come forward? And you have 4 minutes? Yes, sir. Come on up. Mr. Neal, how are you? Name and address, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is John Neal. I'm an engineer with Gay Neal, 1260 Radford Street here in Christiansburg. I'll not touch anything save the wiping. I just wanted to clear up a few misconceptions that I think you may have heard this evening. Be very clear. The concrete recycling is going to go on at the existing manufacturing site that exists in the zoning district there. So that's going to go on. That's going to create dust, but we have dust control measures, and that site is managed and properly as it operates and exists today. The other part of that is that the recycling facility is actually going to minimize the amount of material that is going into the inert fill site. Because where we recycle the concrete and other materials, we're recycling those and sending those back out to job sites to be utilized in the county and other places. There are no utility poles whatsoever in this vicinity of where this inert fill site is. We do, as part of the SUP process, we are required to do an environmental audit every year. And I think the planning director could speak to that, to the specifics of that, but we're required to do that, and we'd offered that up as a condition as well. But it is a requirement. And the Spalding Road site that was mentioned, that is a by right site. It's an inert fill site, it's by right. Be happy to answer any questions if you have any, but thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Bobby Phillips, 2360 Fire Tower Road, the only operator of this facility we're trying to get approved. Want to thank all y'all for coming out and looking at the site personally, taking your time to come out and look at it. The gentleman that mentioned the pole up on Spalding Road, I put that pole there because Verizon would not come move their wire, so I put the pole there, my personal. I have the phone pole, so I put one up to get the wire off the ground. As far as the wires and stuff, it's on the property going to the field. They're nowhere near that. I was invited over to Miss Lucas's house this past Thursday by Craig. We had about an hour conversation. He, besides Bobby Robinette, are the closest houses. They're 100% good with the fill site now. What they asked me was, could I plant some trees where the truck's going to turn around, or could I put up a chain link fence somewhere in the neighborhood of 30-foot long with some screening on it if we had to do it now, or we can plant the trees this fall when they would have a chance to live. But the Lucases are on board with everything we're doing. Bobby Robinette, which goes as Dino, he's on board with everything we're doing. And they're the closest neighbors that we have to this site. And, you know, we took and went above and beyond. When we paved the road in, we paved the road all the way to the top of the hill in the M1 zoning until we can get this approved, and we're going to pave it up to where you've seen the concrete. And then all that concrete that you've seen on that picture will be hauled back down to the lower M1 and be ground down there. So, you know, I just wanted to speak, and then later on, if y'all have a question for me, I'm here to answer it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to come up to speak before I close public address? Okay, seeing no one coming forward, I'm going to go ahead and close public address. Next up is addendum.
No addendum this evening, sir.
All right, no addendum. Next up is items of consent. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? Hearing and seeing none, Madam Secretary, if you call the roll.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Ms. Blevins?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Chair Frizikowski?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Next up is old business, ordinance special use permit, Indigo Road Investments. Is there a motion?
Motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yes, I just want to ask about the screening and the, that Mr. Phillips referred to. Is that something that's going to happen? The screening, the fencing?
Who are you asking it to?
Mr. Phillips. Okay. Thank you.
Any other discussion?
I had a question too for Mr. Phillips. The recycling for the concrete, is that the furthest, I remember going, is that the furthest away from the residents instead of at the top of the hill? Okay.
Any other comments? Okay.
So for the SUP, should we put in that the screening should happen and plants should be planted this fall and a wire fence should be put up so that it is done the way that we expect it to be done?
I think that's for you, Emily.
Or Marty, or
I was channeling Marty, and he was saying that.
I guess a question for Emily is there's conditions in there already about type 4 buffer and the minimum 75-foot buffer. Is that the areas that he's talking about?
I don't think so. I think that goes like kind of parallel to the road, Spalding Road, and it doesn't come down to screen the Lucas's home from the top of the, John, if you could explain it, come on up, please.
The Brinkley Lucas property does not actually border the site for the inert debris site. They actually border the New River recycling site. And so what Bobby had said and worked and talked with them was, and they were saying either or, and he had talked with them specifically about possibly planting trees kind of along their property line, which would not be anything to do with the type 4 buffer and the 75-foot, because it's not really on this property. It's adjacent to their property on another property.
All right, so it's not on site. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay.
If
Then-
that makes sense.
Yeah. If that's what they want, I'm good. That's it.
Okay, the only thing I was thinking of is, if we were to vote against this, never mind, that question's out. But if we were to vote in favor of it, there was discussion at the Planning Commission of reducing the 7-year to 5-year. So I guess that's something, Marty, we would have to put in if we decided to pass it. But
There is no time frame in there because it's very questionable whether that's enforceable or not.
Okay.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
John, if you could come up again. So I had this question. So if it was 7 years, the amount of trucks that would go on average per day is somewhere between 1 and 2.
I did some math and sent that to the board, and if that's what I said in that math, then yes. But I think that is correct. It was on an order of magnitude.
Round
over the
trips, 1
course
to
of
2.
7 years, a round trip. So in traffic engineering and trip generation and the way VDOT determines turn lanes and trips going to sites and things like that, they talk that a trip is a round trip. In other words, a vehicle coming and then leaving any type of site, whether it's a restaurant or a store or whatever. So this site, a trip, it would be, I want to say it was around 2 trips. That was over the course of 7 years. For the amount of volume we're talking about and a typical dump truck, there would be roughly 2 trips per day. Now, obviously, it's not going to be every single day for that many years, but you're not talking about this, as may have been the perception, this endless parade of 20 trucks per day for 7 years. That's incorrect.
Thank you.
Just one question for you, Lee.
Yes, sir.
What you're proposing to do now is already happening, except for filling the hole, right? Concrete and everything?
So yes, sir. The manufacturing site is a recycling, New River Recycling, which is an approved site plan, which exists today. And that site actually is permitted for an automobile graveyard as well. But Mr. Phelps went in and cleaned up everything and pulled everything out of there, and is operating a recycling facility, which we have things such as the crushing of concrete and the pulling out of the steel and things like that and taking it to the recycling center and recycling it, as well as crushing the concrete to be able to create it to use for road bases or foundations, support for foundations for new houses and new buildings, things like that. Yes, sir.
Like I said, the only difference gonna be you're gonna fill in the hole.
Right. So now what you might see, or what I've said is, you have some construction site somewheres in the county. That's still going to be relatively close by, where they are digging out material, or they're demolishing a building, thing like that'll come to this site, which it would normally, regardless of this site permitted. But that site might also send, if they are excavating and they find unsuitable material that they can put back to compact and fill, in other words, clean earth fill, that's unsuitable to use on site, they can dispose of it here. So I think there's also a misperception of that this is just going to be a concrete graveyard. That's exactly what we don't want to happen, with what they mentioned about the concrete being disposed of in the landfill, Cloyd's Mountain or wherever. We don't want that stuff to go to the landfill. We want to crush that up and reuse it. And that's what Mr. Phillips has based his whole business on, all these number of years.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Neal? Go ahead.
Mr. Neal, the recycling, what are the hours currently for the recycling center?
I do not know the answer to that question. I don't know if Mr. Phillips knows or not. What's your current hours?
Our current hour right now for the scrapyard,
Probably ought to come up on the mic so it's on video.
our current hours for the scrapyard in Montgomery County is 7:30 to 5,
Monday through Saturday?
Monday through Friday.
Monday through Friday. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for these gentlemen? You have one?
I have some questions that they might be involved in.
Okay,
I think it would start with Emily.
okay.
I am looking in the agenda packet at the memo from Mr. Foster, the chair of the Montgomery County Planning Commission. And the memo concludes with, staff has also forwarded additional information submitted by the applicant which has not been reviewed by the Planning Commission, was not part of their consideration prior to their recommendation. The information was submitted on April 19th, 2021, following the April 14th, 2021 meeting. At the April 14th, 2021 meeting, the Planning Commission recommended denial of the application by a vote of 5 to 4 to 5. They recommended denial. Was there anything materially that changed between April 14th and April 19th when new information came that could have influenced the Planning Commission's vote? You can, while Emily makes her way up.
I think the most important thing of that is that the members of the Planning Commission that voted in support, however you want to talk about the vote, were people that actually visited the site, saw where the site was, where the existing properties were, the existing operations that's going on, existing on the manufacturing zone property and recycling. None of the members that voted against that took a site visit. And I think that's critical.
Had anything changed in the information that you submitted between the Planning Commission vote and your first public hearing with us? Anything that would have affected their recommendations? I understand what you're saying, that 5 of them did not see the site.
I don't know if anything changed in particular. We probably clarified some information. But as far as anything specifically changing, I don't think we changed anything. Emily may have something different.
I do think it was an attempt to clarify based on how the vote went with the Planning Commission. From a land use perspective, which is what the Planning Commission's recommendation was based on, there were obviously no substantial changes to the application or we wouldn't have brought it forward. So the concerns that they had relative to the proximity to neighbors, the RR zoning being right next to this, and some of the other things that we spelled out in that memo from the Commission, still stand. The supplemental information that was provided by the applicant on the day that we put your packet together for the last meeting was, I think, an attempt to try to better explain some things that were missing.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it.
Any other questions? Thank you, gentlemen. All right, again, this This vote is on a request by Indigo Road Investments for a special use permit to allow disposal of inert debris on an approximate 4-acre portion of property totaling 124 acres. Hearing no more discussion, Madam Secretary, if you call a roll.
Mr. Motts?
No.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Ms. Blevins?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
This is a hard one. I'm really torn on this one. Come back to me.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
I think what I'm struggling with is, I'm struggling with the idea of the traffic and the noise. That I'm having a hard time with that. I heard tonight that would be 2 trucks a day. I can see where there might be days where there'd be more than 2 trucks. So this is a hard one. Let me ask this question. How will this be supervised to know that it's being done the right way? Can anyone answer that?
I understand DEQ will be up there once a year, right?
I think that did come up at the last meeting, and I do not recall what the answer was.
I think locally, it's supposed to be like every other month or every third month at worst, or something
There's some
like that,
E&S
right?
inspections along with that.
That's local, and then DEQ on an annualized basis.
Here comes Emily.
So there's several parts of the oversight. First would be the actual plan being submitted and approved. Then any active sites we have, fall under the inspection process with ENS. There is an annual audit and environmental submittal they have to give to the county as part of being a rubble landfill. So I think that's what Supervisor King was speaking to before. There are some DEQ approvals that have to take place because of the type of stream filling that they're doing there at the site too. So there's a couple different types of oversight, but mostly county staff.
And then Emily, the SUP conditions that the zoning administrator would oversee.
Yes, and there's the conditions that were part of the ordinance that you made the motion on tonight. All those conditions are mostly enforced by staff also through the zoning administrator.
Okay, thank you. With that being said, I'm still struggling, but I will support it. I will vote aye.
Okay. Chair Frizikowski?
Aye.
I have 6 ayes, 1 no.
All right, next item. Do we need to take a break before we move on this one?
Let's just do it. Let's just do it.
Okay, next item up, special use permit, Ivan Bellevue.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I had some discussion about, and I guess this might not be about the wording for, maybe Emily can address this, about rental, the terminology of the camp boarding. If you would address that.
Boarding camp.
Boarding camp, thank you.
Do you have a specific question, or did you just want to see the definition
But
again?
the definition again, and then, why don't you put the definition, tell me definition again, and then I can.
While she brings that up, can I say something about the definitions? I actually find this to be an interesting opportunity for us to look at our definitions within our codes and policies, because this definition, while it doesn't fit exactly with the proposal, is the best that we could do. So I think it's interesting that due to the permit process, we've got this interesting housing or lodging type that we never had before.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that, that at the agenda prep, that Mr. Fidzikowski and I brought that up, that we need to have an update of definitions if the rest of the board thinks that way, that maybe the planning staff and planning commission could look at, because I think everyone sort of struggled with the idea of boarding camp.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think I have a better slide that breaks down a few of the others. We can start with just that definition. This is the definition, and as staff explained, as part of our report in the analysis and our presentation, this says boarding camp. In Montgomery County, if it says campground, that means it's for tents only. And if it involves campers or RVs, it's an RV park. And then if there's going to be structures, it fits into boarding camp. And so that is how we have it broken down by zoning ordinance.
So I guess really my question is, and I already thank you for giving that again to us so the public can hear, is that because of maybe a lack of other words of definition, or what a clarity of the definition, that best fit this category for this SUP, correct?
Yes, that does fit this SUP. That is the determination.
And why would this not be considered a rental property?
Well, it is considered a rental property. The structures that are being built there are for rental.
Okay.
Same as at what we talked about this a little bit when we did the travel center text amendment. We modernized that from truck stop and talked about how we look at them today. A lot of campgrounds today have primitive sites plus camper sites plus cabins for rent. And so we have that too, but you would have to go for each of those uses. And this one is just for the structures, the cabins themselves.
And so this boarding camp is a better fit than a tourist cabin?
Yes, we don't actually define tourist cabin separately. We have that listed out in our definition for motel, and that talks about it being lodging for the motoring public, whereas this use fits more with a destination versus people who are just driving by and selecting that motel. We don't actually separate that definition out. So given the breakdown that we had in the zoning ordinance, this is the use for the SUP here.
And so because it is a beautiful destination, I was there today and visited, and it is gorgeous. But to be a destination, it would only be seasonal during events. Would people only be using those cabins during just events, or so once we approve it, what I'm trying to say is that they could rent it out whether there's an event there or not?
That is correct, yes. Just like the bed and breakfast there at the site, it could be rented out accordingly. But because it is a destination, it fits more in line with people being there for another type of event. That's one of the things that we talked a little bit about in staff's analysis was people come to the winery itself, they go to the weddings, they go to the Lavender Festival, those sorts of things. And so it's not, someone wasn't driving down Catawba Road and decided to stop there. So that helps some with the differentiation.
So I guess the question, and I guess is again, we do need to modernize and think about new definitions of how this would fit, clarity, and to be more transparent of what exactly is allowed, isn't allowed, because as we vote on this, we're going to have other instances of things coming up very similar to vote on as well. I'll see if anybody else has questions, and I may have another question for you. Thank you, Emily.
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a recommendation that instead of the 40, could you put up the drawing of, I think it's a hand drawing of, yes. So even though they're allowed to have structures within 40 feet of their property line, I would like to make a recommendation that they don't have any of these cabins within 100 feet. And I talked to the Ivan Beliveau, and he said that he could accommodate that. And the reason why is because the neighbor line of sight could potentially see lights in the cabin, but having it further away from the line, it's less likely. Because there's going to be a crest. I would recommend that.
You're saying it puts a crest in between where the cabins
Yeah, you can see
are?
the lines. So,
So those are higher elevation lines?
yes. So if those are 40 feet away, he said he'd,
But then we don't know what we're approving if it moves significantly
is that
or
allowed?
denying.
One of the conditions is consistent with this concept plan. So it would have to be generally this concept plan. The only place you have a closeness is with those cabins that are kind of numbered 15, 13, 14, 15. So they could shift, but if he wanted to do all of those units, they may have to go somewhere else. Because you're not close to property lines on either side of that U shape. So the closest property line is that ring. Given the board's wanting to move it 100 feet, it would either be a loss of cabins or some flexibility in rearranging the U.
And is there a problem with the flexibility of rearranging as long as we're not within 100 feet?
Excuse me, I have a frog. Right now, the condition says site shall be developed in general conformance with the plan. Entitled attachment D, is that what that is, I guess?
I think so.
And attachment E that was submitted February 1, 21. You could add language saying maybe something like in general conformance, however, no cabin shall be any closer than 100 feet of a adjoining property line. Put something like that, or, I mean, would you be, I don't know if Emily be comfortable with that. We have to worry about enforcement.
Because of the general conformance, it does give us some flexibility when we're reviewing it. So I think that it's doable if the board wanted to expand that condition.
Yeah.
I would, for one, be more comfortable if we could move it. I had a very spirited conversation with his neighbor this afternoon, and that was one of his complaints, was it was close.
I believe the biggest part of that complaint is that he does hunting on his property. Did he bring that up?
He didn't. I know he said that before. He didn't say that this evening, but
But if you look at the topographic, I don't know, do you have a larger topographic map? There's like a little valley.
This is the ridgeline here. You can see that.
But then it like goes down pretty steeply. And then it goes up to his house. And so the extra 100 feet is really the side of a hill that he probably doesn't hunt on anyway. My guess.
Are you a hunter?
No.
My issue with it is the precedent that we're setting. We have lots of destination sites in Montgomery County, and I would prefer to see, as Vice Chair Biggs mentioned, I would prefer to see our definitions be upgraded or modernized, as in the truck stop. And maybe we can have more control, because once you have precedent set, it kind of limits the board's ability to yay or nay. Because you would be, if you already, as I believe Marty has mentioned, that once you do that, each time the board acts legislatively, they are creating a precedent. So it would be a precedent. Is it something that we cannot handle? I don't know. I don't know what the future holds. I would like to see some kind of definition worked out so that the Bellevos could go ahead with their plan. I was kind of disappointed that the cabins were interfering with this man's hunting, but then again, I'm not a hunter either, so I don't know exactly what he would need or require, but I am more concerned about the precedents, and I would love to see the planning staff work on that, and maybe even some of the other ones, like campground. Since campgrounds have changed quite a bit, I'm sure there are still some that just allow tents, but that's not really what we have. Yes, ma'am.
I think the boarding camp is actually a pretty good definition for this instance. It's specifically a destination. It's only going to be happening for their activities. Versus, I think when we think about precedent, we think about places closer to 81 or to Blacksburg so that they could have more rental possibilities around games and things like that. And I don't think we really have to be concerned about that here. As he explained, they've only had a handful of football, bed and breakfast guests over the years. It's not like they're going to show up. They don't want to drive Catawba or Mount Tabor. So I think this is a perfect example of expanding their business to serve more people and bring more people to Montgomery County. I think the definition for other places definitely need to be clarified, but I don't think it necessarily has to be clarified for this location, because they have so many activities that draw people that this will help them keep people off the roads too. So, and expand their wedding business. So I think that this is well-suited proposal. And I think trying to accommodate the nearest neighbor to the best of our ability. I talked to Mr. Sarver this afternoon also, and he definitely preferred the 100 feet versus making arrangement for hunting on the Bellevue property. So, that kind of thing, so.
It's my understanding that there wasn't ever a conversation had between Mr. Sarver and Mr. Bellevue about what hunting on Mr. Bellevue's property would entail. Like that there wasn't an arrangement
Right,
made.
they never talked, but Ivan did say that he would give Mr. Sarver and would be willing to have a gentleman's agreement or whatever necessary to allow Mr. Sarver to hunt on his property. Mr. Sarver this afternoon mentioned that's kind of tricky. I'd much rather have, the cabins further away and just be happy with what's on my property.
Could I say something?
Paraphrasing, I apologize, but that's kind of the
To your point, Steve, about feeling, I actually do feel like there's a conflict between the definition of boarding camp and what is being applied for. However, I don't believe it's the Bellevue's fault that conflict exists in our zoning code. So I certainly understand the point about setting a precedent. And I think our planning director has heard the direction that it might be time to modernize our definitions on these types of facilities. But I don't think that should or can even hold up the process for the Bellevos, if that makes sense.
Well, it doesn't make sense to me because it's still a precedent. That doesn't change that. So even if we change the definitions, it doesn't change what would be set.
I guess the point that I'm trying to make more is it's not their fault.
And I would absolutely agree with you. I think the plan is very good. It seems like a great fit to have cabins at a winery with other events going on there. Makes perfect sense to me. I just don't feel like having a precedent set that may tie our hands in the future. And speaking of the future, you can't make promises now if Mr. Bellevaux was to sell his property and leave. That promise of hunting on 10 acres disappears, along with, I think, some other things. So it's, that's something else that needs to be considered, too.
The promise of the 12 acres is off the, the 10-acre hunting is off the table, not part of this discussion. I think in the SUP, it actually says that if there is different activities on the property, that these can't be a standalone rental business. Wasn't that part of this too? Yeah. So I think it's worth taking just a couple minutes and talking about what we're really afraid of in the future, what precedent that we are actually afraid of in the future, that this may be setting if we went forward with it today.
Well, I think Marty said it best, so I'm just going to read it. Each time the board acts legislatively, they are creating a precedent. Pursuant to equal protection under the law, the board is required to treat similar situated people similarly. And correct me if I'm wrong, Marty, but that you said similarly. Is that right? That doesn't sound right.
Similarly.
My tongue is tied. So that doesn't mean exactly. Correct?
I think what it means is if someone comes in the future with a similar application, similar impacts, the adverse impacts are different, and they aren't different, then you really should be approving those. That's how SUPs work. Right.
Yeah, that's.
But what is it about the Bellevaux proposal that is scary?
I'm not scared.
What in the future, what kind of precedent do you think that it's creating?
I don't know. It hasn't happened yet.
I think the problem goes back to the definitions that, when Marty sent it out, we had motel, rural resort, and it couldn't be a rural resort because that has to be 30 rooms or more. Campground, well, it's not really that. So the only thing it fit under was boarding camp. And what we really need to think about, to Sarah's point, is in the future, like let's say someone has a really nice piece of property and they want to put cabins on that you can rent, and that seems to be due to COVID where a lot of people like to go and take their families. Would that fit under any of these? I think we need to, that's why I don't have a problem voting for this tonight, especially with the 100-foot thing. But I really have a problem if we don't look at updating the definitions. And who would have thought, that we that this would have come up like this, but this is what happens, and this is why we have flexibility with our comp plan, with our zoning, whatever, to update it as needed. Got to be thinking about what's out there, and now that we've had COVID, and we've had people really like that kind of experience where they can bring their family to a cabin or a house or whatever versus a hotel, we need to think about it, because we've got beautiful sites in Montgomery County, and we're all about tourism, right? So, it's something that we need to think about. So I guess I would feel comfortable voting for it, but I also would want to know if the consensus of the board is to have the planning staff and the plan commission go ahead and start looking at this now, because like Steve's concern is like, what happens when the next one comes,
I think that's an easy question to
and maybe,
answer.
and it's SUP, we have to look at it, but I think we need to get those definitions. And Steve had another point during agenda prep, and that was to make it easier for citizens that were coming forward with a project to know where it would fit. And I thought that was a very valid point, Steve, because that would be, I'm looking at this, I'm like, well, I guess that's the only place it fits.
Yeah, and I think, depending on who reads these things, again, I know one of the planning commissioners said it fits more the definition of a motel. A building or group of detached connected buildings designed or used primarily for providing sleeping accommodations for motor vehicle travelers. So,
Yeah.
where does the line drawn? How far off the road do you not become a motor vehicle traveler?
Well, I think their experience, what they have experienced already, is a perfect example of why it's not a motel. People aren't going to be driving down Catawba or driving down Mount Tabor and all of a sudden say, oh, there's a motel there, I want to stay there. No, they're either going to Blacksburg or Roanoke, or they're going to Bellevaux's Winery and taking part in the
I
activities
think
there.
in this day and age with the internet, and when they hear how beautiful their facility is,
destination.
it would still, because I've seen it in camping, that people on the interstate, 20 miles away from a campground, will be looking through and say, hey, let's go over there. Never planned on doing it, but they will take that detour to get to there because they've heard, hey, it's really nice there, so that's where I'm going to go, even though it's not my intention. May not be the best example, but in this day and age when we have all this information at our disposal, I think it's very possible that somebody would go off the beaten path and look for a place like that.
I would hope that they would, but I would say that would be pretty rare, only because if you're on 81, it probably takes 30 minutes to get there. So if you're looking for lodging, chances are you're going to, go to Blacksburg or Christiansburg and get a hotel, unless you're looking for an experience. And then that is what their product is that experience.
It's an experience, even if they go there just to spend the night, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're saying?
My guess is that they wouldn't just go stay the night. They would go and experience the winery, which is the destination.
Okay. I hear you.
That's why we need updated
And
definitions.
I agree, the definitions need to be updated. There's no question about it. I don't think anybody disagrees with that.
So is the precedent eliminated, Marty, if the definition is changed? For future?
In the future, I think the hope would be that we clarify or maybe change what these different housing or staying over the night kind of things are. And once you change your zoning ordinance, then, yeah, the game changes.
Okay.
We need a different definition.
The difficult thing, because you guys all raise all good points, is people go there for different reasons. One might be they're traveling from here to Florida and they're sick of staying in hotels and they go there, like Steve's example, or someone's going there for a wedding or to check out the winery, or so that will be the difficult part.
And we need to look at it and start thinking about it, because wineries are really popular, you know,
Right.
and having a place to stay when you get there, yeah. It's all about the journey to the destination.
And when you have Galleon Road paved, then, bam, there it is.
At least get ditches, I'm not sure.
Okay. Do we have any more discussion?
Can we put in the, can I modify my motion to include the 100-foot,
Yeah, that's good.
whatever that's called?
I'm still of the opinion that that changes it so fun. 100 feet is a big deal.
No, it went from 40 to 100, so it increased by 60.
It moves everything on the site plan that we're being asked to
Not
consider.
really, it only affected like,
Can we have Mr. Beliveau speak to that?
Yeah.
And see, I'm just,
Can you
it's
show
hard to
that?
vote for something when it's all moved 100 feet.
Actually, there are 4 cabins that probably would need to be moved. And they would just be tightened up to either upper or to the ridge, and that's easy to do.
Okay,
And so a 100-foot limit would be an easy thing for me to do.
okay, can we have that site plan pulled back up? And then, I apologize, I put on my glasses, I still can't see the numbers on either screen. So if somebody could actually physically point at which cabins we're talking about and where they're gonna go.
Oh, I can do
Yeah, go ahead. You can Vanna White it.
It's nice not to have the mask on.
Yes.
I agree. Sorry to make you hop up and down so much, Emily, thank you.
Gotta get my steps in.
April.
Oh, Daryl's got it up on his iPad screen.
There are really 3 cabins, 13, 14, and 15 that are within 100 feet.
And those were the ones in the woods, right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm, that we saw when we went out there, okay.
And I can certainly crowd them up, some this way, and probably crowd some that way, and keep everything from 100 feet.
Okay,
That isn't a substantial change to the document or anything else. It's fairly easy to do.
thank you. Sorry, thank you, Sarah.
I'm glad you asked the question.
One more, and while Emily, you're up there, maybe you can answer this question. And these are 1-bedroom cabins, and the occupancy rate would be just 2 people? Is that the maximum?
We don't have an occupancy rate. That might be
No,
something.
no, I mean, capacity is what I'm saying, the number. If it's a 1-bedroom, we're at the most 2 people in a 1-bedroom, you see what I'm saying?
I don't know who actually sets that, but a lot of times it's pretty common to have a 1-bedroom, but potentially there could be children or child.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly. That may be something that is set by them as the renters. I'm not sure exactly.
Any more discussion?
No.
Madam Secretary, if you'll call a roll.
I mean, I would, did everybody
Hey, you gave it the
nod?
timeout signal. That's
No,
pretty
did
good.
did we nod that I changed?
Amended
The-
your motion.
Okay, thank you.
I amend the second. I think I was the original second.
Yeah, there you go.
So I accept the friendly amendment
Thank
to
you.
my second.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Ms. Blevins?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Jeffrey Zakowski?
No.
I have 6 ayes, 1 no.
We're just all over the place tonight.
Okay, moving on. New business. Ordinance Charter Agreement Cardinal Criminal Justice Academy.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none, Madam Secretary, call a roll.
Ms. Blevins?
I will let the board know I will need to abstain due to a possible conflict of interest with my husband's profession.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Chair Zakowski?
Aye.
6 ayes, 1 abstain.
Okay, now we move to reports. First up, County Attorney.
Mr. Chair, I have no report tonight.
Okay, that's highly unusual, but we'll go on to the County Administrator.
Just one thing to mention, board members, we are continuing to follow the information that we receive out of Richmond regarding the COVID mandates and requirements. As you know, last week, the requirement for masks in government buildings was removed, and it took a little research to make sure we were all on the same page there. But as the governor continues to look at the executive orders, and some of those orders expire the end of June, we'll let you know what changes, if any, need to be made as we move through those. But it's a constantly evolving issue, and we'll keep you posted.
Yeah, if I could just add on.
No, you had your chance.
Yeah. I was hoping you were going to be give it more context, but on May 28th, further regulations do expire. So,
thank you, Marty.
Which is Friday, I guess. Yeah.
It is Friday. It is.
See how much fun that is, Marty? See, you know. Okay.
I didn't want to disappoint Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, that's all I have other than wishing everyone a good Memorial Day weekend this upcoming weekend. Be safe.
Thank you, sir. All right, we'll go down through the board members. First up, Supervisor Shepherd.
I know how important I am to you guys, so I just wanted to let you know I'm going to be out of town next weekend. That's all I have.
All right, Supervisor Bone.
I forwarded you all a letter. I'm going to read it. It's about Mountain Valley Pipeline, Section 401 Water Quality Certification. Dear Chief Walker and Chief Hatton, on March 25, 2021, the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality requested 1 full year to review Mountain Valley Pipeline LLC's application for a Section 401 Water Quality Certification. We write to support this request. The Mountain Valley Pipeline has been one of the most controversial projects ever proposed in our communities, and the concerns of many of our constituents have only gotten stronger since construction began in 2018 May. In order to ensure the careful review that a project of this scale and complexity requires, we urge the Army Corps, to grant Virginia DEQ's request to establish 1 year as a reasonable period of time for state review of the Mountain Valley Pipeline under Section 401 of the Clean Water Act. We believe that the water quality and our communities will benefit from a thorough review of MVP's application for new Section 401 water quality certification over the next year. I'd love a thumbs up if it's okay for us to write that to support the time for proper evaluation.
I cannot give a thumbs up to that. As everybody here knows, the pipeline runs through your district and my district. What I've seen so far as it concerns the pipeline is not so much a lot of our citizens protesting as much as I've seen people from Massachusetts, Colorado, Mississippi, all over the place except for here. And then even some locally, over county next door or something. But I just heard today from 2 other of my constituents. One basically said that he wishes it was just finished and we can move on. The other one said if it hadn't been objected to as vigorously as it has, it would be 2 years in the ground by now. So I cannot, in good conscience, send that. Not only that, DEQ, they're big boys and girls, and I think if this is something they want, they can fight it. I don't believe that any of the letters that we have written have ever been considered, whether it was to FERC or DEQ. I think they pretty much do what they do. So I am not in favor of it. So I can't support it, but I'll leave that up to the rest.
I say this all because of the sediment and environmental containment has been very lax from MVP.
And so we need to wait another year with rain falling on dirt.
So we need MVP to be instructed better on how to actually build a pipeline, if in fact it eventually is built. But without proper investigation, I don't think that anything will improve. And I think improvement of their process is really necessary.
Yeah, I'm kind of like Steve. I won't support that either for the same reasons. And I have people in my district, and I know the pipeline's not coming through there, but they would have gladly let it come through, a lot of them. And they've said the same thing. If they just leave it alone, it'd have been done and they'd been gone and forgotten about. So maybe not forgotten about, but at least it would not be a headache to everybody anymore.
So can I suggest a solution possibly? Sarah, you might call, and I don't know if we have done this in the past where we've sent letters where some people sign it and some people don't, but you might call, I'm looking at Marty. Can we do that? Like I would, for example, be fine with signing on to this letter. But I certainly hear that some of my colleagues wouldn't. And so it doesn't look like you're going to get the full board support, but maybe we could draft a letter from 3, 4, 5, several of us. Is that a possibility?
I mean, certainly individual board members have the right to send a letter, independently, as them, but I mean, for the board to send a letter with the chair signing as the board's position, that would take a majority vote.
No, I'm saying, could she send a letter that's on behalf of these members of the board?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you can individually send it or send it as 2 or 3, yeah, but not as the board or the county without the majority.
That's a very good solution.
Try to be
Very good.
compromising.
And I'll sign on to it.
Thank you.
So
I would not support that.
And I'm not against what people's trying to do, but this board has hired an attorney. When all this first started, we hired an attorney. We sent letters. We've done everything. And I understand people don't want it to happen, but it's here.
It's not here. It's not even 95% done like MVP says it's done.
Well,
You go in Craig Creek Road, there are pipes still outside. I mean, the only place that's actually done is on Catawba Road. There are still pipes out in Elliston. There's still pipes. I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done. And if we don't take care of this county, it's going to get wrecked because of this pipeline, because they have not been doing a good job when they were supposed to. They've been doing a not good job.
I understand that. I haven't been around it. But this board here has no control. I mean, we've done everything we could do. It's your federal and your state people.
Well, this is one more thing that we can do.
Just say they said, all right, we're not going to put the pipeline in. They just walk away. Look what happened to the land there. I mean, the pipe is still there.
Well, I would expect them to take their pipe back, wouldn't you? Not from under the ground, but all the pipes that are in Elliston and on Craig Creek Road and on Mount Tabor. I mean, there's a lot of
I do respect
construction.
what you're trying to do. I really do. But as Steve said, you got people come from out of state sitting in trees.
That is a minority of the
Sitting
amount
in
of people that
trees.
are actually, actually protesting. If you look at the hundreds of people that have been protesting, it's a handful. It's not the majority by any stretch.
I hear
of
what
it.
you're saying, but I respectfully disagree.
They may be the ones up in the trees because maybe that's their profession. I have no idea, but their support structure is all the local people. And those are the majority of the people that are involved in this.
Okay.
You know, when you have politicians higher than us, state and federal, and you don't see none of them coming out against it?
Well, it's not in their backyard. That's the first thing. So, I thank you, April. I think that's a good solution. Thank you.
It is, yeah. Okay, Supervisor King.
I had no report, just want to say happy EMS week. And I do appreciate the staff for working on this to get us a solution for the extra money. And one thing I should have asked earlier, we're getting internet, we're trying to get internet all over the county. And I do believe that there's something that people can apply for to help them with the internet bills.
There is, Jennifer, can you help me specifically as far as?
FCC.
Yeah, it is through the FCC, and I started to say, I know we have a link on our website, but if you don't have access to the internet, that doesn't do much good.
That was
Good point.
Can you
Maybe
email
we
it to
can,
us?
can we notify the media or something, get that out so citizens
Absolutely.
can know that?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, I believe we did a story last week, but we'll make sure that gets in, we'll make sure it gets in the local media too.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Supervisor Blevins.
To dittos that Supervisor King said, just wanted to recognize all of our emergency medical services and the volunteers that serve the community. I appreciate that. And want to say congratulations to all the graduates, the high school graduates, and the college, Virginia Tech and Radford, NRCC. And I wanted to do a special shout out to a Christiansburg citizen, Lorraine Spalding, who has done an amazing job with our Christiansburg High School with Adopt a Seniors and have, organized, coordinated through a lot of the businesses for freebies and discounts to recognize our seniors as they have had a struggling year this year. And just wanted to give her a shout out and all the parents and businesses that adopted a Christiansburg High School senior this year.
Thank you. Supervisor DeMotts.
Just very quickly, on our consent agenda tonight was a resolution to reappoint me to the board for Onward NRV. It also reappointed me to the executive board of Onward NRV, and I wanted to let all of you know that I was also elected to serve as the treasurer in the next fiscal year for Onward NRV. So I know that I advocated for quite a long time with you guys and made you listen to me speak quite a bit on the value of that organization. And I wanted to give you guys all an update that I have gotten more involved as a result of wanting to be able to properly answer everybody's concerns.
Thank you. Vice Chair Biggs.
Okay, ditto on EMS and all the graduates from the 4 high schools. The weather worked out perfectly, so that was exciting news. I just have a couple things. There are going to be some dates, and I'll send these to you, but the NACO annual conference is going to be July 9th to the 12th, and it's going to be at the Gaylord Hotel in Prince George's County, Maryland. So they're going to have a virtual option and they're going to have an in-person option. And that's not that far away from us if anyone's interested in going. VACO will have their summer summit August 19th to the 20th at the Hilton Short Pump in Richmond. So that would be another thing that we can attend. And then the VACO annual conference is November 14th to 16th. And it's planned for the Hilton on Main in Norfolk, Virginia, because remember the Omni is still doing their thing with the homestead. Also, as the census comes in, VACO will be reapportioning, and they have a committee set up, our regions. And so that will be something that will change maybe like how many representatives we can have on the board and that kind of thing. And if you're interested on serving on a NACO committee, you need to let NACO know the presidential appointments. I think you need to let them know by June 11th. And I think, and I left out the most important thing. I want to compliment, and Sarah was there, I want to compliment Craig, and I want to compliment Steve on the great job they did with Gary Creed's memorial on Saturday. Parks and Rec worked so hard to get that parking lot ready and to get everything done, and it was a beautiful day. It was a good turnout. Craig said some really nice things, and Steve did a great job as the MC. I think he has a new career in front of him. And one of the things I thought was so neat is they had memory stones, and Steve, you might why don't you speak to what you said about the memory stones, but everyone got a memory stone with Gary Creed's name on it, and I liked what you said about those.
Well, I mean, there was something new that I had never heard of before either, but basically it's just a memento. You could take it home, you could set it on your desk, use it as a paperweight, something for you to look at to think about Gary. Or you could take it on a hiking trail and leave it for somebody else to find. They'll find it, they'll look at it, they might get on their new internet service that we got paid for by the federal government, and they may look him up and say, hey, he was on the Board of Supervisors way over there in Montgomery County. So it's just interesting. And I heard someone else even mention that some of them are really flat and smooth. You could really skip them over a lake. And so who knows, when that lake is dried up and the earth is just a fiery crust, somebody might find it there too. So, but it's I didn't throw in that last part at the.
But see, isn't he a natural? I mean, he's got a great future in front of him.
Well, I'd rather do feature-length movies. There's more money in it, but yeah, I want to thank the Parks and Rec because they really did an outstanding job getting that place ready. Because Saturday was Gary Creed's birthday, and that was very special to the family that they could celebrate that. They were also appreciative. Everybody, it seems like, that came in there, that went underneath that shelter, was just amazed at how beautiful it was and how big it was and what it's going to do there. You know, a lot of the sod is down for the fields, but they haven't planted the grass for the in-between areas. But hopefully we won't have a drought this summer and that grass will grow, and it's going to be a beautiful park. And it's really something, Todd, especially for you, looking forward to a park in Reiner, to see what a great job the contractor did and Parks and Rec did. And I think even Mr. Neal had a hand in that too, getting that thing designed and built. It's going to be very nice. And I think there's even possible chance of more expansion down there if some things change. But it was very nice, and I do appreciate all that hard work. I wanted to also bring up something that I did prior to me coming to the meeting. They had a meeting down at Fotheringay in Elliston, and it was the Virginia Lewis and Clark Legacy Trail meeting, and they basically had the chairs from Montgomery County, who is one of my constituents, Mary Lou Hawley, and they had someone from Pulaski County and also someone from Botetourt County. And I learned that the Lewis and Clark Trail stretches from Bristol all the way on up to Charlottesville and beyond. It was quite interesting, all the facts that they brought up, and that, I'm going to screw this up, and I just asked them this, but the colonel that owned Fotheringay, either his daughter married William Clark's son, or maybe it was the other way around. I can't remember, but that's right here. That's right here in our backyard, and it just kind of emphasizes how important tourism is. And not to be sad that we're losing our tourism director, but it's an important thing, and she's been telling us that for years, and she's quite right, because this is a whole group of people that I could have never identified. I didn't know there were people that followed it, that take their vacations and just track where Lewis and Clark went, and other people in history. So I thought it was fascinating. I love to hear history, especially before it's revised. I like to hear the real history. So with that said, that's all I got. I think we're dismissed. Where's my hammer?
We're dismissed.
Where's my hammer?
Sounds like we're at school.
Where's my hammer?
I figured you'd understand